Welcome to the Golden Age of Cardboard podcast, where we remember a time when stacks of cards were held together with rubber bands and Mickey mantles were put in bike spokes. We hope you will enjoy and reminisce as you come along with us as we tell stories about the baseball cards from the Golden Age of Baseball. We will examine the state of the vintage baseball card market and talk to some of the greatest collectors in the hobby. You won't be hearing us talk about any chrome or shiny cards here. Now, to take you on this retrospective journey, here's your host, direct from the shallow end of the gene pool, my son, Mike Moynihan.
If you've been in the hobby for more than a day, then you know how fast the sports card market moves. There are now more options than ever to buy, sell, and research your cards. One of the most frustrating hurdles in the hobby is the fees when selling your cards. You know, those other popular marketplaces, the ones with their average seller transaction fee of 10%, the ones that don't have the seller's interest in mind. Wait, what? Who would do that? Well, hold on to your horses. No, not those horses. Welcome to the Card Flip, a place where we want to provide a simple alternative to buying and selling cards. No clutter, just you, graded cards, sealed wax, and the easiest of transactions. So what do you say? Are you in? Great! Welcome to the Card Flip, the seller's marketplace.
Yo and hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Golden Age of Cardboard podcast. I'm your host, Mike Moynihan, just like every week. You know the drill. Welcome to another show. I'm really excited about today's show. I've got a guest on today that, quite frankly, I've known forever in the hobby, and yet luckily I've been blessed to meet him recently at the Dallas Card Show. He was kind enough to invite me to a content creators dinner that we had at the Dallas Card Show. As part of that, he kind of spearheaded that, and it's Dr. James Beckett. If you've been in the hobby at all for any length of time, you know who Dr. Beckett is, his influence on the hobby and his legacy within the hobby is tremendous. And for a lot of us, I remember as a kid, my favorite day of the month was getting my Beckett Baseball Card Monthly, which he will readily admit is a product of what a great team he had and how many great writers and all the contributors that made that the great magazine that all of us young collectors enjoyed getting in the 80s and throughout the 90s and 2000s and still today even. But I want to talk to Dr. Beckett about his journey and ask him a bunch of questions and just talk the hobby with him because he's such a wealth of knowledge. So let's bring him on now. Dr. Beckett, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm great, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Well, you're welcome. We're kind of doing a little home and home here, which I love, being able to be on your show a little bit and you get to be on my show. It's truly an honor and a privilege to have you. So appreciate you taking the time. Let's start today with, everybody knows who you are, I hope. If they're watching this, I hope they know who you are. But what I'd love maybe to provide some insight on is the early days of Beckett Price Guide and how you did that, and then how that transformed over the really years and even decades. Maybe tell that story as much as you want to, however in depth you want to go.
First of all, I think it's exciting. There's people in the industry in the last year that have no idea that either I'm a person or even have any knowledge of anything, because there's so many new people getting in. I find that really exciting. And if you wind the clock back almost 50 years, back in 76, I had this idea. I was a freshly minted PhD in statistics, and I thought, there's no organization in what cards are selling for. There were a lot of haves, or not a few haves and a lot of have-nots in terms of the knowledge. And so wanted to level a playing field. So the 76, I announced the first kind of national price survey of what cards were going for. I kind of had an idea myself, so I wasn't like blindly asking people, hey, I have no idea. No, I had a pretty good idea because I was one of the haves. But got a lot more representation than I would have thought from all around the country, really active. Of course, I was hitting all the big shows anyway, so I made sure that I was in good relationship with a lot of the key dealers, a lot of the key collectors. In fact, most of the people then were collectors / dealers. They did their collection. And so then that for a few years I did that just as a free kind of a pamphlet that told what cards generally were worth. And then in '79 launched the first book length, which was kind of every card in every set of the key sets. And as you know, Mike, the hobby was almost well, we would consider it all vintage at that. It wasn't considered vintage at that point because vintage was probably even the '60s were too new. It was more the '50s and back. And people really wanted to get the cards from the '40s and the '30s and the T206s and stuff like that. So, and then in '84, starting the baseball magazine, that was a major step. And that's really what brought, from me being not a lone ranger, because I always had contributors, but, once the company got rolling, that's when really things took off, because I hired some really, as you mentioned, some fabulous teammates who really filled in my gaps. Everybody has talents and abilities, but nobody's good at everything. So I was really good at certain things, and I was able to fill in gaps where I wasn't as good with some people that far surpassed me in their, for example, design excellence.
Right. You just mentioned back in the day when you started, vintage wasn't vintage. How do you define vintage? What's your current definition of what you consider a vintage card?
We batted this around in the company a lot, and I think we kind of stopped at 1980, 79 or 80. It kind of puts Wayne Gretzky right on the straddle. But within baseball, 80 is still the last year that you've got Topps alone. But 79, 73, last year of kind of series. There's different definitions, but the other way to explain it, because I know you're a big PSA guy, is that anything, probably it's vintage if you don't expect it to be a 10 out of the pack. The cards now, if you don't get a 9 out of the pack, you're thinking, what did I do wrong? This is terrible. But if you get an unopened pack from the 50s or the 60s or the 70s, you wouldn't expect to get all 10s. I mean, the scoring was a problem. Probably edges on Oichi, but just saying, so vintage to me has to do with condition and the appreciation, the type of, to be not baby boomers necessarily, but generally it's people collecting their childhood, and that's what they consider vintage. That's why some people consider the '80s to be still vintage, because they're saying that was my childhood.
And in theory, shouldn't think about classic cars, right? If a car's 30 years old, it becomes vintage. Like, shouldn't it be a rolling target of what vintage is defined as? I'm not saying it should. I'm thinking in theory that would make sense. As a card gets to be a certain age, it becomes vintage. It's aged enough where it turns into vintage.
Well, that's excellent point. That's a, it depends on how you interpret the word vintage. But I like what you've done. The golden age doesn't move. The golden age is the golden age. And so I kind of think of vintage more as the golden age of and so that's the way I look at it. But there's still that alternative that vintage is a moving target. And frankly, it has been, because, in the '80s, you weren't thinking that even the '70s were vintage.
Yeah. And I think it's important. I think vintage is such a broad term. We think pre-war, everybody knows that's pre-war. And then you have, to me, the golden age of cardboard, which is really post-war 48 through, I call it 1980. I consider that the golden age era. And then you just have different eras instead of just vintage or modern or ultra. I think those are too broad you can just define an era of cardboard. And I think that's much more descriptive, and someone can understand that easier to me.
Well, it's not that confusing in the sense that when I was doing the IRL real life dinners over here that you mentioned, I would do back to back. Monday would be vintage and Tuesday would be modern. And without defining what that is, people self-selected.
Sure.
other than Rich Klein, who said I can go either way.
Right.
A couple of them said they could go either way, but most of them they either tend toward modern or tend toward vintage, and they self-select without worrying about the exact definition.
Sure. And I don't think people should get hung up on that by any means. Just self-define it, like you said. Everybody's going to have their own, criteria that they use to put themselves in an era. But I guess I could call you. I just thought of a parallel of you and your legacy in the hobby. You're the Bill James of sports cards, right? You were doing things ahead of their time. Bill James, of course, pioneered the sabermetrics, in baseball. I think you pioneered price guides and the idea of creating a level playing field, as you said, which I think is a great vision of what you were trying to do. How did that change for you throughout the 80s, getting into the overproduced era, let's say, the hyper-produced era? You got Upper Deck coming on the scene and Score, and you already had Donner's Fleer tops. The market became saturated. How did you zig and zag during that time? What changed for you in the business?
Our cups were running over, and Bill James is kind of a contemporary of mine. I remember when he was getting started, and I have some of his early stuff. And I actually had a fork in the road where I thought, here I am, working on a PhD in statistics. Do I want to go, more sports statistics or, but I'd always loved cards. And so it just was so obvious that there was a need for cards. But Bill James, I have respect for the work he did. Again, I got all of his stuff. What the parallel is, that's what you're saying, is that what happened to him and happened to me is that as you got into the 80s, it was we outstripped the ability for the human mind or the human piece of paper or a physical spreadsheet or a handwritten tabulation to have any contribution to accuracy. The personal computer, personal computers hadn't become, omni-available, and with increasingly powerful software and data analytic tools, he would have never gotten to the next level, and neither would I have. And so with having again the early price guides were not as computerized. The later ones, they wouldn't have been possible. So when you had all these different manufacturers and sports, and the proliferation of sets were big, you just go back to the 50s, there weren't that many cards, and you could kind of keep them. You could almost know them in your head. As you got to the 80s, it became kind of incomprehensible without modern data aids.
That's ironic that the card surge happened at the same time the technology was growing to allow for that. You know what I mean? It allowed for...
It lowered the barriers to entry, because people don't understand how difficult it is to make a card set. They need to take a picture and then you put some stats on the back, but there's design elements, and they also have no concept of the levels of approval that are required by the leagues and the players associations, to where just putting out you just put out the set, you're having to get approvals. And so all that stuff, when it's done in the physical world, you're FedExing things back and forth and waiting. It's the digitization of sports cards also, it would be included in that. There was more computerized, more digitized.
Yeah, for sure. Going back to vintage and your just history in the hobby beyond what you did for Beckett Sports and Beckett Media, I know you're a collector at heart, just like the rest of us. What are some of your favorite sets of all time? Just thinking baseball, what comes to mind when I say favorite sets?
Well, what comes to mind? I'd say 56 Topps is probably my favorite set. It's the first card I ever got. 33 Gaudy is near and dear, because that was the set that my dad started out collecting with. So, and I got a bunch of his Gaudis and still have them. So I don't think I'll be trading them off anytime soon. I have traded a few at times and regretted it. So I'd rather have, if my dad has a 3 condition, I'd rather keep that than a 5 or a 6. I'd
For
obviously rather have an 8 or a 9, but that's all the years I was collecting and going to all the key shows. I never saw Gaudis that were 8s and 9s. Now I maybe saw a few play balls that were 7s and 8s, but it's just amazing, the true condition rarity. And I saw nice 50s cards. So what else would there be? Let's see. Within baseball, that kind of brackets it. 56 would be my favorite, 33 my dad's favorite. I think 41 play ball is a little underrated. I think that the kind of pastel, interesting colors, I think are nicer than 39 play ball, not very attractive.
Do you think that
the 41 pinnacle?
Do you think 35 Diamond Stars is underrated as a set?
I collected that by all variations. That's the kind of, again, I don't call that OCD. I call that, actually, I make a big distinction between the O and the C. I never obsessed about it, but I was compelled. I had a compulsion to pick up a card if it was a different back or a different year or a different color, from those Diamond Stars.
I just thought it was a very colorful, beautiful set.
It's Art Deco. It's representative of the time. But my dad didn't have as many of those. My dad had 33 Gaudis, 34 Gaudis, some 39 play balls, a bunch of 40 play balls, very few 41s, a couple of heads ups, not a couple of Gaudi black and whites, but mainly it was the major sets.
Yeah, the 40 play ball to me was kind of groundbreaking.
And a fabulous set. Yeah.
It's a fabulous set. I have all the Hall of Famers, and what's great is it was kind of that first set that really incorporated older players and current players, right? And frowned upon at the time, kids.
You wonder if that was an afterthought. They're all in the higher series,
right?
And it's maybe they ran out of. They just wanted to fill it out.
It's a great point, and highly likely, right? And you have cards of Shoeless Joe Jackson, and you're missing some key names. There's no Ruth, there's no Gehrig, there's no Cobb, but the reality is there's 80 something Hall of Famers in that set, which is just unbelievable for the time. And the nicknames that they put on there on the banners is fantastic. I really love that set. I think 41 play ball, the colorized version of 40 play ball, essentially is very beautiful and very cool, but I think it's kind of lame, like that they reused most of the pictures and
too small of a set maybe.
Yeah, and they didn't incorporate the older players, the retired players in 41 play ball like they did in 40. So if those are your favorite sets, what players from that era do you really enjoy their cards? Do you gravitate towards?
Well, in the 30s, Ruth and Gehrig. I probably am more a fan of Ruth and Gehrig than I was of Ty Cobb, for example, even though I think Ty Cobb was amazing. Hannes Wagner, same thing. And great players, dominant players of their era. DiMaggio is kind of in between for me. I actually was more of a National League fan, so Stan Musial, maybe even more so than Ted Williams. But and Clemente obviously was my favorite player really of all time, from watching him play and living in the Pittsburgh area in some of my formative years.
Is that why his 56 card is the first, or what card is on the first issue of Beckett? 65 tops maybe.
Yeah, I had the first issue. It wasn't really picking any set year, I think, but I think I wanted a vertical card,
right?
Otherwise, I would have done his rookie. But and the Dale Murphy was kind of an effort to reach out to
current,
more modern cards. Although you think back in 79, 84, those years. Even the 50s weren't as old as they seem now. For
sure. So Mantle, Mays, Aaron.
Mantle, Mays, and Aaron, yeah, probably in that order.
Yeah.
Mantle, then Mays, then Aaron. And Clemente probably would be above them in my heart, but Mantle, in value is, sets the pace.
I do think that Musial, as you talk about, Stan Musial is criminally undervalued, underrated both in the sport and in the hobby. And I've learned that you can be baseball good and not necessarily hobby good, right? That's a distinction.
Well, okay, Stan's problem, number one, too nice a guy, maybe. He wasn't controversial enough. But, when I went to the baseball Hall of Fame fantasy camp and I stepped up to the plate and George Brett was my pitcher, he didn't die laughing, but he just said, Stan the man. Because my baseball batting stance is Stan the Man Musial.
That's fantastic.
When I grew up. And so what George Brett did, he turned around, he put the glove on his right hand and pitched to me left-handed. And he actually is very ambidextrous.
I didn't know that. Interesting.
Yeah, so he's throwing me curveballs on the outside corner. And, it's the umpire, you're uniformed up and all that stuff. And, I'd like to say it was a liner to right, but it may have been a dribbler. But it got between the first baseman and the second baseman. And I'm standing on first base and laughing at George Brett. Is that all you got?
Right. That sounds like a wonderful experience, which leads me to my next question, which is, in your decades-long history in the hobby, are there some experiences that just stand out to you, people you got to meet or events you got to attend that you're standing around? All of us have that kid in us and we go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm here. Do you have any of those things that you can remember and recall?
I'm trying to make a list of those and I haven't finished it, but it certainly includes, I've been to every national, and that was pretty amazing. Not just the first one, but the 91 national in Anaheim, and the next one is always hopefully going to be the best one ever, which it actually might be. The Hawaii shows were huge highlights. I missed the first one, but I made all the other ones up until I retired. But that was a great fun to go over there. Close friends with Kit Young. Setting up, starting the first card show in Dallas back in the early 70s with my buddy Gervis Ford, having a card shop, that was kind of in on the ground floor, do what he want. There weren't models for how to do it. So I like trying to be a pace setter. I like doing things that haven't been done yet. The price guides, just, burning the midnight oil, but seeing the results of your labor, those were fun. Every national's fun. You get to see people that you don't see that often. So card shows, going up to Larry Fritch's and getting a personal tour there. Some of these amazing, spending the day with Barry Halper at his house, the first Topps Archives auction, getting a insider tour of the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, and some amazing, not so much the players. I mean, I've always treated players as regular guys, and they're not,
right?
but they are regular guys, other than their amazing skill in their sport. That's probably. I mean, I'm fashioning my answer, and I'll have something in more detail. That's an excellent question, Mike. Thanks.
So let's talk about the National for a second, because it's something that you obviously have been to every one of them. It's the hobby Super Bowl. We all know that. We love it. I have a huge passion for it. My first National, most of my viewers know, it was 1990, in the first one in Arlington. And I'd never seen anything like it before. And to go back, right? And into those days, and I'd love to be that kid again with today's budget to be able to just clean up. But the Nationals changed, obviously, over the years. What do you think have been some positive things that have happened with the National in the time that you've been attending?
Well, the three things that are at the National that weren't there the first one is corporate presence, with the card companies. And that's generally been very positive. I think it really helps draw a crowd. The autograph pavilion, which I think Jeff Rosenberg does a great job. And that's, again, adds a lot of interest and enthusiasm and publicity to it. And then thirdly is kind of like the Breaker Pavilion. and the multimedia aspect of live broadcasting from the show, again, has brought some energy to it. So those are all, I mean, otherwise the first one was kind of like a vintage show, mostly vintage.
Yeah.
But now it's an everything show. You can get, new, old, everything in between, memorabilia. The displays are fabulous. Again, it's hard to describe, but even if you've been to a bunch of them, the next one you're always excited about, what might be there that catches my eye that I've never seen before.
I'm always overwhelmed that first day of the show. No matter how many I've been to, it doesn't matter. I go in and I go, oh my goodness. And I do think that the National distinguishes itself from just a card show, no matter how big it is, even as big as Dallas is today. It's still just a card show for the most part, right? And you can multiply the number of tables, and yes, it can take up more square footage, but the reality is the National brings that marriage of, yes, there's card dealers, and yes, all the auction houses have displays on stuff you've never seen before. And I remember holding a Babe Ruth game used bat at a National, just things that I would never do at a card show that you get to do and experience at the National. That's unique. That's special. We're not even talking about how great it is to have the annual family reunion of all your friends that you've made in the hobby that you may only see once a year at the National, but it's where everybody goes and everybody congregates, and you get to rekindle friendships. You get to tell great stories in person. And I think that makes that's what's so special. All of these things combined make the National a one-of-a-kind event. Do you agree with that?
I totally agree. No, it's a must event. And like I said, the Hawaii show being in February or so, was kind of not 6 months before, but almost 6 months before, was, would you, it's a rhetorical question, Mike. Would you rather see your good friends once a year or twice a year?
Of course. Right.
So, and there was a high concentration there as well. So those were good. And then, back when I was single, you go way back, the regional show circuit back in the 70s, you'd see a lot of the same guys. So you'd see some of these guys every month. So you'd know what they were looking for. You'd know what they were interested. You'd know their kids, because their kids would be under the table as in a car seat or in a little stroller thing. Next thing you know, they're 40 somethings.
Right. Yeah, I'm one of those kids, right? I was one of those kids back in the day. What do you think in terms of the National? Can the National maintain its allure, its mystique in the ever-evolving world that we live in today?
I'm hoping the answer is yes. I just was talking to John Brogy yesterday, and I think he's one of the things he's really good at. I think he's a good listener, and he's got, he has a consistent team from year to year. They're getting feedback. He's circulating around, talking to the dealers and the collectors and seeing what they want. So there have been some innovations that have been positive. And, I'd like to see more seminars, but you can't make that happen. You can have seminars all you want, but if people would rather be on the show floor and do their meetings ad hoc, they're going to do that. These digital and virtual things, I think that's positive. But again, if you have a certain amount of real estate you want to cover, which includes the people that are behind the booths that are kind of stuck there. And you've got a certain amount of time in the equation. It's if you do the math, and you've got 600 or 700 tables, and you've got 600 or 700 minutes, you can't spend a minute with each one. That's unsatisfying in both ways. There's some people I don't want to spend a minute with, and some people I want to spend a whole lot more than a minute with. And so it's a challenge, but it's a good challenge.
There's a lot of people new to the hobby, as you and I both know, in the last couple of years. A lot of them, since we didn't have a show last year due to COVID, are going to be going to their first National. What advice do you give those people going for the first time, maybe to a National?
I'm not sure that you could do keyword searches in podcasts or YouTube for the National Sports Collectors Convention. But, talking to John Brogy, he said, it's amazing how people ask him questions as the general manager of the National, that are questions that are readily available. If you listen to any podcast or any YouTuber that's talking about the National, you'd pick up on these things as preparation. Or if you went to the NSCC website and looked up some of the FAQs. So hopefully there's enough podcasters and content creators that are trying to help with the preparation, because like I said, there are people that are clueless. They show up there and, I try to bring a couple extra boxes, or, just what am I going to do if I get a bunch of cards? What am I going to do? And I bring my podcasting equipment. And so I'm prepared, but I think a lot of people are not prepared. And budgetarily, I think it's really hard to be prepared, because you don't know that you may see something that truly is the whale, that's beyond your budget, but you're never going to see it again if you don't pull the trigger on when you see it. In fact, Wednesday afternoon, not even Wednesday night. I mean, you better be, if you're the first one there, you better pick it up, because it's not going to be available.
What's your favorite day of the show? Wednesday through Sunday. Is there a favorite day that you just really enjoy more than the others?
Well, it's perverse, but I probably enjoy Sunday the best, because it's more sedate. It's thinned out sometimes. Dealers are willing to make deals more so. And there's probably nothing. I mean, in my younger days, I would have said Wednesday, because I was more aggressive and I wanted to get stuff for my collection. And even when we're running the company, it wasn't for my collection, but it was for, to get type cards to show in the almanacs and things like that, and really all the sports. So Wednesday's best for that, but Sunday is just, you're just kind of tired, but I'm probably still in the zone, and I've had a chance to case the place. And so all my obligations a lot of times are filled. And so Sunday I can be more of a free agent and pop back in on somebody that I want to visit with, or stop in on a table that I didn't give full consideration to. And by then, some of my hobby buddies, Rich looks out for me, Rob Veras looks out for me and says, hey, you need to go to this table, and here's what's there, or this is you didn't recognize him, but this is that guy that you haven't seen in 10 years. And so that was cool.
I love that even as long as you've been in the hobby, that you still have things you're looking for. What's a card that you would love to add to your collection that you don't have currently, that either you want to rebuy because you traded it away and regret it, or just want to add it because you in any sport, whatever sport?
I probably don't answer that in a great way, because I'm really trying hard not to have an agenda, not to have a want list. And so I'm very free spirit when I come up to the table, and I'm not looking to buy expensive cards. I have a lot of expensive cards. And I also don't espouse the theory of, if I sell an expensive card, then I'm going to take the money and put it into another expensive card, a de facto trade. When in reality, if you sell an expensive card and you have the money, there are many things to do with the money, including buying other cards. So I'm trying to have less cards, Mike, and more strategic cards. And I have my display, but there's a lot more cards that are good cards that I don't have room to display. So to buy more cards to display, it needs to be really, really special. And there's almost no card that I would want to pay, which wouldn't be true of 40 years ago. I can't think of a card that I'd want to buy at double what I think it's worth.
Right.
There are many cards I'd be willing to buy if something was half what I think it's worth. In other words, if I had a seven grade card that somebody's selling, and then they also have an 8 grade of the card, and I really only wanted a 7, but if the 8 was the same price, I'd take the 8.
For sure.
I don't have any restrictions there. I don't have a minimum grade. Like I said, I would take an authentic card if I thought it was unusual enough that I'm never going to see one. So I'm trying to have. I'm a recovering organizeaholic, linearaholic. I have structureaholic. I mean,
Right.
it's what helped me be successful. It's the compulsivity, and I'm giving myself permission to be nonlinear and unstructured. So when I go to the national, I'm going to come back with stuff. I have no idea what I'm going to come back with, but it's going to be fun.
Yeah, there's 2 points I want to expound upon that you've touched on. One is about the national, and I asked you about advice for newcomers, and there are tons of guys, myself included. I'll be doing a national advice video as we get closer, and I have every year. So it's not, you could go back. It's going to be pretty much the same thing, but sadly, people don't go back and search for things like that.
And they should.
They should, of course, but
in fact, every podcaster, every YouTuber should be doing something like that. Not that it's public service, but it's what people are thinking about.
Right.
And so I'm kudos to you.
And the other thing you said is that I love is the don't go into a show with an agenda. And that's something I try to encourage people. If you just at the Dallas show or the Fort Worth show that I went to recently, it's like I go in with no agenda. I don't know what because I don't want to be set up for disappointment if for whatever reason I can't find that card or in a condition that I'm comfortable, whatever, the right price, you name it. So many variables that go into buying a card. I think people think it is linear. It's not. Think of all the variables that go into actually deciding to purchase a certain card for your collection. It's more than one, more than two. And so to go in with no agenda, I think leaves the world as your oyster. You have way more possibilities of what could happen. And that's exciting. That's invigorating. You and I probably less now, but earlier in your life when you were more like me, I have tons of stuff I would love to buy and love to own. So I'm not going to have a problem finding something.
Exactly.
It's what will I find? And that hunt is significantly joyful if you let it be. If it stresses you out or whatever, I think you got another problem. If it's I just look forward to it. I look forward to the hunt.
If you went to a big show, went to National or the Dallas show, and all you did robotically was to go to every table and say, do you have any Juan Gonzalez cards?
Right.
Okay. Number one, if they say yes, it's most likely stuff you already have.
Right.
But most people are going to say no, because he's in that in between era where he's not completely vintage and not modern, but he was a great player, deserving of Hall of Fame consideration. And but I mean, that's a waste. It's not a waste of your time, but that's what the internet's for, and search parameters.
Right.
And if somebody's got a great collection and you meet up with them at the National, now that's cool. But to ask every dealer if they have, when the obvious answer is going to be no for a lot of them, and then you come back and say, and yet almost anything you might want, you could find if it's there. You can't say if I go to the National, if it doesn't exist at the National, it's not there. No, because people don't bring certain kinds of things to the National.
Good point.
They're readily available.
Right.
A really obscure Juan Gonzalez thing. My guess is your eye would be tuned in to looking at the showcase. It's just like if there's a Clemente thing, it pops. It's almost like it's got a halo on it, or it's got a spotlight on it. When you're scanning, I think you have to have that ability as a collector to be able to look at a table full of cards, and your eye somehow is drawn to the things that are special to you.
I totally agree that that's a sixth sense / superpower.
Right.
That if you're a collector long enough, you develop. I can go to a table and immediately know if I want to stay there longer than 10 seconds to scan the case.
Right.
And you do have to do that distinction, right? I think that's really important in terms of being efficient and maximizing your time. But you also, I think if you go in, like you said, if you don't go in with an agenda, more of those things will pop out at you. if you're looking for an obscure Juan Gonzalez or you're some player collector, nothing wrong with being a player collector. I'm a recovering player collector, believe me, but you get such tunnel vision, and it's a needle in a haystack, versus if your agenda or your opportunity list might be larger of things you might consider, then that just opens up the possibilities even greater, right?
You're setting yourself up for success.
Right.
Instead of disappointment, as if you could be disappointed going to the national. But if you had a narrow list of what you're looking for, you could say, oh, I didn't get those, instead of thinking, it's half empty, half full. I mean, here's what I did get that I've never seen before, or I thought this was just great. I mean, I had all those years where I went and I could look, I could touch, but I couldn't buy. I was just observing and tallying what things were selling for at the national. Well, now, enough grass has grown that if I see something, I think it's a good deal, I can buy it and I can resell it if I want to, or I can put it up on my wall. And occasionally I'll make a mistake and I already had that. Well, I'm not making a huge mistake. And plus, it's not a crime to have two of something.
Right.
Good card.
For sure. Well, as we finish up here, Dr. Beckett, first of all, thank you for, being so generous with so much time. Tell people where they can find you if they're living under a rock and don't know, what you're doing nowadays, where they can hear your Sports Card Insights show, follow you on Twitter, etc.
I use my full formal name, just not to be stuffy, but just to distinguish, because I'm no longer the, owner of Beckett Media. It's been 16 years, if you can believe it, that
Wow.
I sold, and then they sold to another group. But so Beckett Media has their own podcast. I don't want to have any confusion. In fact, they're a sponsor of mine. But so it's just Dr. James Beckett Sports Card Insights. Try to do a daily 15 minutes or less with eclectic kind of topics. Again, I'm not trying to sensationalize anything. I don't have the 5 best tips or anything like that, which is fine. I don't begrudge those who do, but and I suppose people might listen if I did, but it's somewhat disingenuous. It's just personal preference. So I'm trying to give some principles, educate, but also entertain. Some of the good old days, but there's some good new days now too. So again, I don't have to do any one thing, so I can be in the broad niche, and that's been a lot of fun to have a real range of guests, from younger people to older people and everything in between.
I
all
love
sports. So it's Sports Card Insights. Baseball's my first love, but Sports Card Insights. It's been fun. So it's everywhere podcasts are. It's pretty much to this point all audio. I may do some video if I can get some mentorship from you and the other YouTubers that just are so great behind the camera.
Well, happy to help if I can at all. I would love to be a part of that. Seeing you do that, I'd love to see you on YouTube. But love your show. Love the stories that you put in, and the people. You make it about people, and you make it about history and stories. And I think that is severely lacking in our modern, social media world. I think,
well,
there's an audience for all of it, but still
15 minutes sounds short, but if you're telling some stories, it isn't that short. If you're to the point. Now, if you go on for a couple hours, then I'm sure there's some great nuggets in there, but I'm trying to avoid having show notes. Just, it's a single topic or a single interview, and if you're interested, you can listen to it. And if you don't, you don't have to, and you can do some in the background. Listen at 1.5 speed.
Right.
So it doesn't hurt my feelings.
Well, thanks so much for being a part of Golden Age of Cardboard and making your debut here. And I'll have you back if you'd like to come back.
I'd love it. I love it. Kindred spirit on the vintage. Like I said, I'm trying to, across the waterfront, be all things to all people. But my first love is vintage baseball.
Well, you came to the right place then.
Golden Age.
Golden Age. Well, thanks again, Dr. Beckett. Thank you to everybody out there for watching, listening, wherever, if you're on YouTube or podcast. Really appreciate it. And hope you enjoyed this episode. We will catch you guys soon, and keep collecting.